something in this that I may be able to lead in. So first of all, this is a join the national campaign for best academic practice models for Black African descendant students, a national call to action for culturally competent educational excellence, equality, equity, and self-determination, sponsored by the Parent-Student Union, Family Empowerment Institute, Academic Olympian Society, and the African World Exploratory University. My name is Jim McWilson, and this is speaking to our responsibility. Our meaning all people who consider themselves Black African descendant and any other people who are egalitarian in their thinking and believe as egalitarians do. This is our story. In his story, we've been taught and are being taught in classrooms on his story. They're trying to wipe out our story, and we have to tell our own story, otherwise it will not be told. The reason why we're doing this is for these children. These are our children, and for that reason, we need to be able to break through what's taking place now, which is a repeat of what was put in place before. How do you erase from their minds so that every book that they get is a Europeanized version of the world as they put it together through the slavery process for Black African descendants and any other people that may be marginalized, discriminated against in this particular process. The key is to stay focused on our children and any others that can be included, but priority number one is focusing on our children. Here's where I want to start, and this is a little bit different. Prior to there being any religions on the planet Earth, the stars existed from a power source that ultimately would create who we are. So to get past anything that any human says, we have to go back to what created what you see. All of the stars in the universe, the galaxies, the nebulae, all of those things was created by a power source long before any human wrote anything or spoke anything. So I want you to keep this picture in mind, because this predates any and all other belief systems. This had already been created. From that body, one of those stars was the Earth. Again, if you're out in space and you're looking back at Earth, you do not see humans because we're not there. It is a picture coming from what was created in the beginning. So this is all about the beginning, and not as in a religious beginning, but a creation beginning. So as we walk through this, just keep that in mind. In terms of our Garden of Eden, that is the Black African descendant, not the alien, not the invader, not anyone of any other hue, and why this Garden of Eden, which contains everything that we need as a people to survive prior to anyone else. So the Garden of Eden, from this perspective, is the Black African land known today, in today's terms, as Africa. The way we know that this is our Eden, which is where we were, and what it is that everyone else wants, and the fact that everything that we needed and need is still in that Garden of Eden that everyone else is invading. Our creation is simple. Look at the monuments that were left in ancient times, which people want to claim. They want to claim they were enslaved there. The Arabs want to claim that it's theirs. The Persians wanted to claim it was theirs. The white Europeans won't say it's theirs and they did it. However, what they will say is that Black Africans didn't do it. So we have to be real clear. The question is, did you do it? Because if you didn't do it, then those who were there in the beginning. And it has to be something that we're prepared to simply state. It's not a question. It's a fact. It is there. It's timed. And these particular pyramids are only 3 of 70 to 100 pyramids throughout the land called Kemet, changed to Egypt, and in the land of the Sudan, Nubia, and the like. We are located because of the enslavement of Black African people. And we have to remember, regardless of what this government says and any other government, in the beginning of the arrival in what is currently the United States, we arrived as captured Africans, not Negroes, not coloreds, not biracials, any of that. It states in the record, both from the ship and from Jamestown and throughout the laws, the writings of Thomas Jefferson and notes to the state of Virginia, the words of those who spoke in the legislature, the Black codes, they acknowledge the Africans, but their attempt as now is to change our perspective of who we are, where we came from, how we got here, and to keep us focused on the distraction of fighting what they say we are as opposed to looking for who we are. Easy way to understand that, and I use this with each of the classes that I've had and each of the presentations that I've made, and you've heard this before. What happens when a chicken raises a baby hawk? Is a hawk a chicken, or is it a chicken? So is the hawk a chicken or a hawk? Goes back to the beginning. What was it biologically created as? A lot of people give it a lot of different answers. But if it was created as a hawk with the attributes of a hawk, it is a hawk according to the creator. It is a chicken according to the biologically has a control mechanism, which means the hawk can fly. But the chicken would convince the hawk that it cannot fly because it is what the chicken knows. And if it wants to do what it does with the hawk because it raised the hawk, then it's going to teach it everything that it knows and some things that it doesn't know. And that mind of the hawk then may be the same thing as the African who now believes they're anything and everything that they've been told, as opposed to what they were created to be. So these are just visuals for people to look at and ask the question, what is the difference between a hawk and a chicken in terms of biology, physiology, but more importantly, how about the mind? Because they both have a mind. Stephen Biko states it pretty clearly when it comes to the mind. The most potent weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. The most potent weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. What you believe in, what you have faith in, what you religiously believe, what you politically believe, what you sociologically believe. And in the land of the oppressor wants to control that belief system, that faith system, that political system, so as to control your mind. That is the weapon they use. That went on in the beginning, and it's going on now, and it's on steroids. These are basic fundamentals of how it works. Trying to define what is going on with us right now, putting those together. And I'm using books that people can study. And the first one is The Rape of the Mind. The importance on using the rape of the mind is because that is exactly what they did. They raped the mind, they raped the body, and they are still raping the land. That is the psychology of thought control, of menticide, and brainwashing. These are critical issues as we go through the process of how does this work? What are they doing? There are people who have studied this ad nauseam. They know the answer to it. They put the pen to paper. The problem is what was done to us in the beginning. You can't read. And if you know how to read, don't let us know you can read. Because if you start reading, you may comprehend. If you comprehend, you may understand. If you understand, you may be able to discern. If you're able to do all of those things, you might know the difference between being free per their definition and being liberated according to your original creation as a free person in a land that you were born into in terms of the beginning. It is a very important thing. The white architecture of Black education clearly defines what that white set of architectures meant. Carter G. Woodson, one of the first PhDs, defined the education of the Negro when he went to receive his PhD, thought he had been educated and that was the key, and took that back to the community and understood immediately that he had been miseducated, and therefore wrote the book on the difference between how they mean to educate you and you believe you've been educated, and what critically he thought about and went back to describe the miseducation of the Negro as they were called at that time. And you'll notice there's a change in terms. The Rape of the Mind is a critical book to understand all people who are involved as fascists, racists, authoritarians, even democratically, quote, elected presidents. They do the same thing. The media does the same thing. If you're not critically thinking when you listen to the media, you won't pick up the bias. You won't do the comparative analysis, and therefore you will believe either what Fox says or what CNN says or what MSNBC is saying, when for Black people, they're all saying the same thing. There is no difference. The difference being, will Fox just take a hammer and beat you in the head, or will CNN or MSNBC slowly poison your mind that they care more about you than Fox News? They do not. But you do have to get your news somewhere, and you want to be able to do a comparative analysis because, again, the psychology of thought control is what leads to menticide. Menticide comes about because one is brainwashed. One is brainwashed because it's violently forced on you. It comes before menticide. And this particular book is not about Black people. This particular book is about European fascists, kings, queens, and the like. So it's very important to understand how that works. In terms of brainwashing, to challenge the myth of Black inferiority, Tom Burrell was an advertiser. So he can delineate the difference between how the media works as an expert in that particular field and break it down as to how he was able to go in and the battles he had to fight in order to make that clear and understand. He explains how the games is still run, and it's running now. So we have someone currently living that is still talking about why he felt it necessary to write this book, even though he was extremely successful in putting together a public relations and marketing company. This one is probably the most important because it asks a set of questions. What you see is slavery, the African-American psychic trauma. But what it says is, what happens when a group of people are kidnapped from their homes, smuggled away in chains, and held as captives in a foreign land where they are tortured, raped, and forced to perform hard labor by the lash of a whip under constant threat of death. This is a powerful statement. So they understand this stuff. It's already here. So it's not a game. It's here. They've studied it. They've gone through it. Many people have died because of trying to reverse it. Amos Wilson's The Falsification of the African Consciousness brings it closer because it talks about specifically the Eurocentric history, psychiatry, and the politics of white supremacy. Very important that he takes it, breaks the big picture down from all of the people, and then breaks it out. What in the United States, because it's Eurocentric, in the books that they're currently reading today, the fact that they're trying to erase Black history, the Black story, the Black achievement out today is because they understand that there are people who have written about what it is that they did to get us to this point. At the bottom of the page, you can see he also wrote the book, The Blueprint for Black Power. That's about close to 900 pages. And he covers everything. It's a masterpiece, and one that is used along with Theodore Cross's Black Power Imperative, which is also around 900 pages and is the basis upon a lot of this material. Dr. Joy DeGruy is just probably par excellence in how she describes post-traumatic slave syndrome. And if you know anything about military and PTSD, it's the same thing in different. You have the same things going on. It's a mind game. It's a mind game. It's a mind game. And the way they play that mind game and the way they bring trauma to it and what happens at the end of the day is critical. And all of this is available. And I'm bringing this up so that when you look at this, the amount of information that is available today, you can find this information. And for those who have listened to her directly are impacted because she has studied this stuff for the longest time, still living and still teaching it in all kinds of environments. What happens with menticide? This is a classic example today on the continent of Africa. In the land of Eden for Black people, you have a person bending down to a wooden idol of a white Jesus because it's inculcated into that person's mind. That's not a child. That is a grown man bending down and kissing the foot of a piece of wood that has been carved by someone to represent something that they've never seen, don't know exists. That's why there is a problem. And the person that's holding it is even worse off than the person that's on their knees. It is being on their knees is bad enough, but the person who is presenting it is even worse. So understand what that means. In the judiciary, in African countries, in the judiciary, learned, educated, miseducated people are in position to judge their own people, and they are judging their own people by the people who enslaved and colonized them by the mere fact of what they have on their head. So you can't get black judgment, you can't get black thought, because what they're still wearing and what their slave master and colonizer knows is that they're still thinking the way we want them to think. They're still using the rules that we want them to use, and not the traditional rules of traditional Africans who traditionally owned the land in the first place and had their own laws in the first place. These persons, whether on the religious side or the judiciary side, are doing the same thing. Absolutely no different. Whether the person in these pictures were two white men, these two black men are doing what two white men would be doing directly. They're simply doing it indirectly. This is critical for, if we're going to break the paradigm, then we have to go back and look at who are we speaking for? When we speak, are we speaking for, quote, our original people based upon what we know? Because if we're not based upon what we know, then we need to find out, what did we know? When did we know it? That's the reason for the pyramid. If you have to go back to the pyramid, then you have to go back to MAAT. And MAAT existed long before the Europeans brought forth their laws, long before the Americans brought forth, long before Muhammad was responsible for the Quran. It was already present. These are critical pieces for us to know. Intellectual warfare in Jacob Carruthers is designed with design intent. Hey, folks, there is a war going on, and it is within your mind. They are warring to take over your mind so that your body can go function, but it functions with you warring inside your mind. Are you going to do the racist thing that's been set up to seem like the right educated thing? Or are you going to do the right thing based upon the interests of your people? So there are people, again, people who've done the work. See, Carruthers has done an excellent job, and anyone has access to it. Dr. Naeem Akbar says the first thing you need to do is break the chains of psychological slavery. Otherwise, you can be a PhD at Harvard, which they do have. You could be a doctor, a lawyer, a candlestick maker, or a janitor, or a pastor for that. But if the chains are still psychologically in your mind, you're still doing the same thing. It's no different than the judges with the white cap on, or the fellow bending down, or the fellow holding the bending down statue. They're all the same. Now, this is what upsets people the most. I've never given a presentation that this did not upset, so I'm going to spend a little time reading each one of these because they have specific meaning. Islamic non-egalitarian Persians, Christian non-egalitarian Greeks, Christian non-egalitarian Romans, Islamic non-egalitarian Arabs, Christian non-egalitarian Europeans, Christian non-egalitarian Americans, Christian non-egalitarian Hispanics, and Judo-Christian Islamic non-egalitarian Black Africans. They all think exactly the same about Black traditional African people who ruled before them and whose knowledge they have stolen. This stuff is all proven. So it doesn't make a difference if you're a Black African and you're doing unto your brother what the white one's doing, what the European is doing, what the Arabs were doing, but it doesn't make any difference. If you're doing the same thing, you're an enemy of a Black African traditional thinking. people. That's the way it works. So it's not one or the other. It is all of the above. And this is where the war takes place. The war takes place here. And it doesn't matter who the people are. It doesn't matter if they want to help you or they want to hurt you. You have to be able to define what they're doing. If it's not in the best interest of the Black child, then they're an enemy. It's pure and simple. There are people, whether it's John Brown on the one hand, or David Walker on the other, or Malcolm on the one hand, or Reverend Reeb on the other hand, and Reeb was white and Martin was black. They were both murdered because they believed in being egalitarian in their approach to their fellow human being. So we can't distinguish it just based on the color of their skin. We can't distinguish it because they say, well, we're with you. Well, the game has shown me behavior and outcomes from the behavior tells you where they stand. If you're going to measure a white male, you measure that white male, if he's a pastor, against Reverend Reeb, who is a black pastor, a white pastor. You want to measure again against a black pastor, then you measure him against Martin Luther King. That's simple. If you want to measure a white woman, then you measure her against Viola Aluso, who gave her life just to drive people to vote. Didn't have to, lived in the suburbs. And the same thing with Reverend Reeb as a pastor who just walked out of a restaurant on his way to march with Martin Luther King, and the Klan man walked up to him and asked the question, "Are you here with that coon thing?" And he said, "Yes." He proceeded to take a baseball bat and beat his brains out right in front of the restaurant that he just walked out of. So this is a matter of life and death. And people are not treating it that way. But 20 years from now, the kids who are now one are going to have to look back and see what did they do in 2026. Because as they look in 2046, they're going to, and how do we know that they did? What do we know that they believed in? They can't be nice and polite and not factual and truthful, because that is betrayal. And right now, a lot of people are betraying what is in the best interest of Black children by being polite, courteous, and amenable, and unlike Mrs. Moore says, just being unapologetically Black. It doesn't mean you hate anyone. It just means you got to know what you know and take care of business. That's what this is about. So this is very controversial. You need to know it, which is why it has to be done in this phase, because within the construct of the United States laws, your Constitution that you go by, the bylaws you go by, that you respect, when the very Constitution that controls the laws, that allows you to set it up, they don't respect the very document that they found it, because they were all crooks in the beginning, period. They were kidnappers, they were rapists, they were murderers, they were all those things, but people don't want to say that. Not because I said it, but because they don't want to look at what? They don't want to look at their own history. You can ask a person who is very pro, how did you win the West? That's a simple question. When I was in Ohio and I was at the Board of Education, I simply asked the question, how did Ohio become a state? They weren't prepared to answer. They just said, because it was signed by Congress. Well, that's not true. The Enabling Act, signed by slave-holding Thomas Jefferson, allowed Ohio to become a state, but only after they defeated the natives to take control, like they are in Iran right now, of the Northwest Territory, which was all, quote, native Indian territory. So this stuff is just keeps going over and over again. And because they don't want you to get this in school. And if you get it in school, pre-K through 20, okay? Pre-K through 20, not pre-K through 12. because Dr. Ben is one of the best masters. Asa Hilly is just one of the best masters. And they will tell you they didn't get it in school, and Carter G. Woodson most certainly didn't, because he had to write a second book on the fact that he was miseducated. And he was talking about people with degrees, not the average person. He was talking about people with degrees. So very important for us to know this. Professor Watkins here, I interviewed him prior to his passing on this particular book, because it helped me frame how to do research in terms of who were the architects. And one of the people who was very involved in the architect was at the first Mohawk conference on the Negro question that was held at Lake Mohawk in Ulster County, New York, June 4th, 5th, 6th, in 1890. And the person that chaired this conference was former President Hayes. So anyone who knows President Hayes' record, then you will recognize him chairing this conference. But the only question, they only had two to solve. One was the Indian question, and the second was the Negro question. How are we going to create an architecture for these people to be educated high enough to be good servants to those masters who no longer will be on the plantation? Again, the miseducation of the Negro. If we can get to the mother first, we don't have to worry about the men. We don't have to worry about the boys, because the mother's going to make sure that they are miseducated, not intentionally, because there's information locked away in her brain that she's not allowed to unlock, and therefore has to give her child the best that she can give, but can't give them everything because she wants to protect them so they don't wind up being lynched. The father that goes through the same thing. The father knows that he's on lockdown, but he's trying to get the child to clear the child's brain so the child can read, which is what we're doing now. But this is way back then. So this is nothing new. This is a fight that people have to take on. That miseducation goes right into the miseducation of the Black child. And Nathan and Julie Hare, they did definitive work on this very issue on the miseducation of the Black child. The question is, the miseducation is just twofold. They want you to get a certain number of knowledge on one side, and they want you to get enough knowledge that if you're not careful, you'll wind up back in slavery, which in the 13th Amendment only means they have to convince the court that you did a crime, whether they made it up or not. And according to the 13th Amendment, they can re-enslave you. Now that's forward thinking, because that was put in way back in the 1860s. So we do have solutions, but they have to be our solutions. Reclaim the African mind. We have to be aware. We have to go through healing. We have to reconstruct who we are from what they took away. And we have to understand the unity that we need to do it. Unity does not mean uniform. It means that you're focused on the same thing. You may go by bus, by train, by plane, you may walk, but you're trying to get to the same place. And that's the collective action for the African child, which is our future. So there's a balance here that we're trying to draw between the divine Black African Garden of Eden, and people have to believe in that divineness, that we are divine. Because if they don't believe it, then we will continue to believe what they tell us to believe. Whether it's on MSNBC, Fox News, doesn't matter. Long before all of these, MAAT existed. Truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, and reciprocity. Critical, long before, thousands of years before these people, these aliens showed up. The divine woman is divine because whether the men like it or not, the only way they're going to get here is not through immaculate conception. They're going to get here because they're coming through a woman. And the man has to understand, quote, their divineness. Their roots are rooted in the divine land, which is the epitome of what you see. The tap root of a tree. If the tap root is cut, the tree dies even though it looks healthy because it can't get the nutrients. What they're trying to do with our children is cut the tap root to make sure they get the surface stuff, which looks good, sounds good, football, basketball, track, baseball, dancing, rapping, whatever that is that looks good. That's not the taproot of who you are. So you can't become who you should be. From MAAT to Taiseti to Kemet to Nubia and Kush to today. So everything we need is there for us to study. But that's going to happen because the community does it and stop begging the school to do it. Because so long as you're begging the school to do it, the school and the rulers of the school, i.e. government, knows that we, Black people, haven't done our job because we haven't exposed them to who we are, not who we're going to be once we go through their school and learn their way from their culture. The teachings of Ptahhotep is as old as MAAT, so that we did it before. Back to intellectual warfare, because unless you're ready to engage in intellectual warfare and state it, then it's just a game, okay? And the achievement pyramid is that we're being taken on today in the new executive orders in all of the areas of health and school and academic and economics and labor and law and politics. The mandate for leadership in Project 2025, this thing was done 10 years ago. And Project 2025 hits every single one of these places and spaces with a negative for Black people. We have to know that. The schools that we control, the pre-womb school, how do you educate the daughter of today? Because second, there's no thought of getting pregnant, but once you're pregnant, how are you going to teach the body? What substances are you going to put in the body? How are you going to treat yourself while you're pregnant? How is that going to affect the child? Once the child is born, it's the same thing. Who are you going to introduce the child to? The family, the father figure, and the community school as you introduce that these were normal rites of passage from the beginning of every ethnic group on the continent. That's where this comes from. It's nothing new. It was just put in a format. But it's how do we study us? Asa Hilliard, who I brought in to work with the students in the academy that I set up, this was his whole thing. African power, affirming African indigenous socialization in the face of the cultural wars. This is long before woke, CRT, and everything that's been done now. Long before. Again, these are our children. This is what we need to do. We have to keep them in our mind. It doesn't matter who we're standing in front of. We have to have in mind, why are we here? The path forward began between a Black and white organization, December the 5th, 2010, on improving opportunities for African American students. And the current MAGA Klan group is saying, how do we go backwards? It's the opposite. Produce a consciousness, a new mindset in education. That's what we're trying to get to. But it's our education. Because once you go into the government school, you have to be already prepared. Otherwise, the child's going to be gobbled up. And that comes from the community of self. How do we do what we call the community? But there's a community of self. How do you take care of your own self? Because if you can't take care of your own self, you can't take care of the kids. It just doesn't work that way. Martin Luther King put it best. Why we can't wait? Well, the urgency of now was day before yesterday. It was before Trump came in the first time. We were already in bad shape. All he did was exacerbate it. But the bottom line from both Frederick Douglass and King is freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. And if you're not willing to go to battle and demand and bring pain, you can demand all you want, and nothing will happen. You can lament all you want, and nothing. You will grandstand all you want, and nothing will happen. Simply because the oppressor has the power, and unless you can bring pain to make them change their direction, they're not going to change. That doesn't matter whether it's in the United States or on the continent of Africa. So instead of the Nguku Watiyango on decolonizing the mind, the politics of language. Language is critical, right? Chinwezu, the two of them wrote almost the same book toward the decolonization of African literature, because they were taking Black children, taking them to England and France and Belgium, and then sending them back 12 years later as scholars in blackface teaching white literature. That's what they were doing. Again, we're operating out of whether it's the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, the Europeans, or the American post-traumatic slave syndrome is present because they were a part of the people who did it. Breaking the chains are critical in Ghali, in Mali, in Songhai, in Axum, in Zimbabwe. Again, one of Ace's best works, and I work with he and Wade Nobles, who co-authored this book, The Reawakening of the African Mind. That's where we are right now. We're trying to reawaken the African mind, but we have to know that in order to produce a new mindset. So our next step is where we are. How do we promote best academic practice models for Black students academically, culturally, socially? All of that is mixed into this one campaign. The children are already ready. We have to show them the way. We have to give them leadership roles on the ground where they are. Classic understanding of achievement matters, getting your child the best education possible. This was a 10-year, $30 million campaign that was put forth by the NAACP. So reading Achievement Matters will tell you what we did, because I was the director on the West Coast out of San Diego. So all of this stuff is documented. It's not anything new, it's there. So again, join the national campaign for best academic practice models for Black African descendant students. Now, the term Black African descendant student is critical now because the United States government is classifying everyone in North Africa above the Sahara. They're classifying them as white. They can be as black as an ace of spades. Down south, coming out of Africa, the Afrikaners can now come to the United States as racist can be, and they can qualify as an African American because they came from the continent of Africa. So the games they play, they're playing a great game, but we have to know when the rules change. Because whether you are a Moroccan, whether you're a Libyan, whether you are a white Afrikaner racist South African in the United States today, you can be classified as an African. So if you don't distinguish that you're a Black African descendant, whether you are in the United States or on the continent, then you make the mistake of not understanding. So as in closing, this particular PowerPoint is for people to understand that there's a book list here that you can use. From the book list, there are YouTube videos that you can watch the actual master speak to what you see here. But either read it, listen to it, but to become conscious, to move from an assimilated Black African descendant to a conscious Black African descendant, There's a war going on within us between those two groups. And who wins is going to determine the future for our children. Any questions? Check out the Parent Student Union, Family Empowerment Student Achievement Institute, Academic Olympiad, African World Exploratory University. Just look them up and find out plenty of information. And with that, I close.